Year is 1804. A people crushed by centuries of empire rise from the ashes. In their hands, rusty muskets and farmers' tools. Against them, the might of an empire that ruled half the world. This was not a rebellion. This was a war of life and death.
The year is 1804. Beneath the snow of Šumadija, the land trembles, not from winter's chill, but from fear. The Turkish janissaries, rebels against the Sultan, are slaughtering Serbian knezes one by one. Blood flows through the streets of Valjevo, Ćuprija, and Belgrade. The cries of the people echo, and in the shadow of incense and plague, an idea takes shape: rebellion. Serbian rebellion. The whip of Ottoman tyranny has reached the bone, but the people have decided to no longer be silent. At the end of the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire was clearly in decline. The Janissary Corps, once the elite of the Sultan's army, had become a destructive, rebellious force. Turkey was losing battles in wars against Austria and Russia, and internal weaknesses were devouring its provinces. The great powers increasingly viewed the Balkans as prey in the struggle for influence. The so-called Eastern Question was born. But while the French and Russians vied for dominance, the Serbs experienced something that would ignite the flame of uprising. The last Austro-Turkish War, 1788 to 1791, ended by the Treaty of Sistova, brought the Serbs only fleeting hope. Fighting as Hajdūks alongside the Austrians, they gained political and military experience, but not freedom. Sultan Selim III attempted reforms, among other things expelling the janissaries from the Belgrade Pashalik. Instead of terror, the authorities increasingly relied on the Serbs. Thus, Haji Mustafa Pasha, whom the Serbian people called the Serbian Mother for his respect and care towards Serbs, rose to the position of governor, who granted Serbian knezes wider powers: tax collection, partial judiciary authority, local self-government. In those years, the Serbs began to revive the economy and plan a future without Turkish terror. But the peace did not last long. The expelled janissaries, armed and enraged, found refuge with Pazvan Oglu in the Vidin Pashalik. Disregarding the Sultan, he began attacking Serbian villages. The Serbs defeated him near Kaladi in 1793 and again in 1797, raising a people's army of 16,000 under the command of Stanko Arambasić. Yet, as Napoleon marched into Egypt in 1798, the Porte, preoccupied with external threats, was forced to allow the janissaries back into Serbia. They soon clashed with the Serbian knezes and in 1801 took Belgrade, killing Haji Mustafa Pasha. His son arrived too late, only to learn his father was dead. Power now fell into the hands of 4 janissaries: Küçük Alija, Agan Lija, Mulla Yusuf, and Mehmed Aga Fočić. Calling themselves Dahije, they began to rule with terror. They revoked all privileges granted by the 1793 and 1794 firmans, judged on their own authority, imposed new taxes, arrested, tortured, and killed. The Ottoman Porte was powerless. The Sultan had no control over his Pashalik. Serbs, Turks loyal to Mustafa, and even some Spahis all began to conspire. In Zemun, the dissatisfied gathered, among them the prominent Petar Ičko. Vladika's court in Montenegro sent letters. The Russians refused support, and the Serbs appeared to be preparing for uprising, on their own. The Dahije sensed danger and decided to prevent it. At the beginning of 1804, they launched a terrifying campaign: the slaughter of the knezes. They killed the most prominent Serbs: Knez Aleksa Nenadović, Lija Birkan, Knez Petar of Ćuprija, Haji Ruvim. In just a few days, more than 70 knezes, priests, merchants, and notable people were murdered. Brought to Belgrade, recorded Mihailo Pejk from Zemun, the people were forced to surrender weapons, flee to the forests, and some already began to seek revenge. In the west, Jakov Nenadović and his nephew, priest Matija, rose. In the east, Milenko Stojkovic and Petar Drobnjak. Among all, one name began to shine: Karadjordje. First, 3 national leaders gathered in Šumadija: Đorđe Petrović, whom the Turks called Karadjordje, then Jank Katic and Vasa Čarapić. Around them quickly gathered many, both local Serbian population and Hajduks, among whom were Stanoje Glavaš and Hajduk Veljko. Upon this news, the people rose even beyond the Kolubara River, where Jakov Nenadović, Alex's brother, and priest Luka Lazarević stood out. A similar situation was on the other side of the Morava River, where Milenko Stojkovic and Petar Tudorović Drobnjak distinguished themselves. Soon almost the entire country was under arms. At the assembly of the most prominent men of Šumadija, Stanoje Glavaš was first proposed as the leader of the uprising, but he refused. Then Knez Teodosije Marićević from Ota was proposed, who also declined. On his suggestion, Karadjordje was chosen as the leader of the uprising. On February 14, 1804, at the gathering in Orašak, attended by about 300 people, mostly from the vicinity, the assembly in the village of Orašak was not a representative or national parliament, but a meeting of elders, mostly from Šumadija. It was not about electing a nationwide leader, but about the leader of the uprising in that area. The Dahije were surprised and frightened by the massiveness of the uprising, and thus began to attempt to stop it. Through bribery, negotiations, and deception, a Ganlia, with about 400 janissaries, went to Šumadija on February 21, 1804, aiming to negotiate with the insurgents, but, in reality, the main goal was to attack the rebels. He promised the Serbian people better conditions and the abolition of customs houses, offering Karadjordje money or an estate in Austria better than his in Topola. Karadjordje refused personal offers and asked for guarantees from the Austrians regarding regime change, as he could not rely on Turkish promises. Since Aganlia did not agree, he and his army suffered defeat at the Battle of Drulupa on February 24th, where he was wounded in the leg and barely escaped to Belgrade. This was the first conflict between insurgents and Dahije and their first victory. The significance of this victory was great, as it raised the morale of the Serbian population. After the defeat at Darklupa, the Dahije attempted to stop the uprising with negotiations. On March 4, in Hasan Pasha's town, Karadjordje received Dahije delegates and demanded their surrender, which was refused. Negotiations failed. Under Karadjordje's leadership, the insurgents captured Rudnik on March 18. In April, they defeated the janissaries near Batočina and Jagodina, and routed the remnants near Leštane, bravely commanded by Vasa Čarapić. By the end of April, the entire Šumadija was cleared of Turks. The insurgents approached Belgrade, causing panic among the Dahije. They sought help from Bosnia and Vidin, but the Porte could not assist because the Dahije themselves were rebels. Pazvanoglu, once an ally, now aimed to seize control over Belgrade but did not receive approval. The situation was tense, and the uprising was strengthening. Freedom was getting closer. As Karadjordje and Jakov Nenadović tightened the noose around Belgrade, news of the uprising reached Constantinople. Hasan Beg, Ibrahim Aga, and others tried to turn the Sultan's attention to Serbia. The Grand Vizier sent orders. Bosnian Pasha Bečir arrived with 3,000 men. The Dahije began to fear. Could the Pasha and the populace unite? That would be unthinkable. Yet, it happened. In April, Karadjordje attempted to seek protection from Austria, but was rejected. Nevertheless, they secretly traded weapons. The Serbs were alone, but no longer helpless. As the uprising erased Ottoman rule from Šumadija, forces became more organized. Čarapić on the Danube, Jakov on the Sava, Karadjordje and Katić in the center, the whole country under arms. Bečir Pasha arrived as the Sultan's representative, ready to remove the Dahije and restore order. The people stood with Karadjordje. But before the insurgents lay a new threat, a stronger Turkish army from Bosnia was coming. There was no turning back. What followed was the bloody Battle of Čokešina, the Serbian Thermopylae. Brothers Nenadović, monks, and Serbian blood soaking the monastery field. But more about that in the next episode.
The year is 1804. The uprising is blazing across the Belgrade Pashalik. The Serbs have taken up arms. The land trembles. The people have risen. But the true battles are yet to come. While the Šabac fortress was under siege by Serbian insurgents, a large Ottoman army was assembling deep in Bosnia. The Vizier of Zvornik, Vidajić, and Mula Nojina, leading several thousand troops, set out toward Šabac with the intention of breaking the siege and aiding the encircled Turkish garrison. The situation around Šabac was extremely tense. Although the rebels had successfully established the siege and cut some supply lines, their lack of heavy artillery prevented a swift capture of the fortress. The garrison commanded by Musaga was aware of the dire situation. They were already considering surrender negotiations, especially after the rebels intercepted and repelled the planned supply convoy along the Sava River. This failure further demoralized the garrison and signaled to Musaga that reinforcements from Istanbul or elsewhere were far away, and that help from Bosnia had become their only hope. At this critical moment, from the east, a new and far greater threat emerged: the advancing Bosnian army, whose arrival could change the entire course of the uprising in western Serbia. To prevent them from linking with the Šabac garrison, Rebels from the Valjevo region, under the experienced leadership of Mateja and Jakov Nenadović, planned an ambush near the Čokešina monastery. The location was not chosen randomly. The monastery lay on a key strategic road, nestled within the dense oak forest of Kitog, known for centuries as an inaccessible stronghold of outlaws and an ideal place for ambushes. On the eve of battle, the most important rebel leaders gathered at this sacred place. The famous Harambasha Đorđe Petrović, already renowned for his bravery and terrain knowledge, the Nedić brothers Damjan and Gligorije, also hardened fighters and leaders of Valjevo's Hajduks, and Jakov Nenadović himself, who had temporarily left the siege to coordinate defenses and synchronize forces. They were expected to unite and oppose the superior enemy, preventing it from reaching Šabac. However, serious disagreements over tactics and command soon arose. Jakov Nenadović faced a grave dilemma. Lifting the siege of Šabac to help the rebels in Kitog would nullify the effort invested so far and risk allowing the Ottomans to reinforce their position in Šabac. On the other hand, he could not permit the Bosnian army to reach the besieged city, as that would lead to defeat and a likely collapse of the siege. The ambush plan was clear in its intent, but its execution became a source of deep division. Harambasha Đorđe Petrović was the first to oppose it. He believed their numbers were insufficient to effectively confront a much larger enemy in open battle or even in a classical ambush, and that it would be wiser to avoid direct engagement until more forces gathered or a safer method of slowing the enemy could be found. He refused to participate and demonstratively left the position, taking about 300 Hajduks with him. His withdrawal was a heavy blow to morale and numbers and a clear sign of fractured command. Shortly thereafter, Jakov Nenadović clashed with the Nedić brothers. In his memoirs, Proda Mateja Nenadović describes how his uncle Jakov wanted to set up classic ambush positions around the monastery, while the Nedić preferred a more direct and daring approach, pushing toward Lešnica. Unable to impose his command or agree on a unified strategy, Jakov also withdrew, likely feeling helpless and disappointed. Left alone at Čokešina, only around 300 Hajduks remained, led by the Nedić brothers and their loyal companions, Damjan Kutišanak and Panta Damjanović. This group, devoted until death, chose to resist the Ottoman force regardless of the odds, demonstrating not only courage but a tragic willingness for sacrifice. On Lazarus Saturday, April 28, 1804, in the dense Kitog forest, the Serbs set an ambush along the narrow road. It was a carefully selected terrain with tall groves and uneven ground that provided natural cover and made large army maneuvers difficult. The Ottoman force, numbering between 1,000 and 2,000 men and better equipped, approached from the direction of Janja and Zvornik, around 8 in the morning, with drums pounding, cymbals clashing, and zurlas wailing, clad in silver-trimmed weapons and rich embroidery. The Bosnian lords advanced toward the Serbian positions. Just ahead of the main column, Nojin Aga and Dervish Aga proudly pranced on their spirited Arab horses, unaware of the danger lurking in Kitog's shadows. Above the quiet Vranjevac stream, the Nedić Hajduks silently waited, ready for a fight to the death. As the Turks entered the trap, the Hajduks launched a surprise attack, opening fire from concealed positions and inflicting heavy losses, throwing the enemy into disarray. The rebels skillfully used the terrain to defend their positions, repelling several assaults. The first phase of battle went surprisingly well for the insurgents, who showed extraordinary bravery and tactical skill. But as the day wore on, the Turks regrouped and, relying on their numerical superiority and constant reinforcements from the rear, began to wear down the defenders through prolonged gunfire. Actually held firm, the sheer weight of the enemy began to crush the resistance, and the air grew thick with gunpowder smoke. The turning point came when the Serbs ran out of ammunition. Ritrevai, Toprao, Jabana. With no choice but to engage in close combat, they resorted to sabers, knives, and rifle butts. Vuk Karadžić vividly described how the flashes from the rebels' rifles grew rarer. Realizing their ammo was spent, the Turks encircled the Hajduks from the flanks and rear, cutting off any chance of retreat. Surrounded and outnumbered, the Nedić brothers and their comrades fought to the end. Both Nedić brothers, wounded in the legs, lost the ability to stand but continued fighting while sitting back to back, encouraging others to hold the line. Every shot was precious, every blow critical. The battle raged until evening, descending into a bloodbath. In the final, merciless Turkish assault, when they attacked like rabid lynxes, all 303 Hajduks, including the Nedić brothers, perished. Their sacrifice sealed the fate of the battle. Jakov Nenadović returned with reinforcements, but too late. He arrived at a scene of horror. All the rebels were dead or dying. Only a few survived by hiding among the bodies, but even they succumbed to their wounds in the days that followed. 5 days later, Abbot Haji Constantine and the Nedić's mother, accompanied by locals, discovered a dreadful sight: mutilated, disfigured bodies of the fallen. All were buried beside the monastery, which had been partially burned and looted by the Turks. It was a picture of total destruction and heroic, yet tragic sacrifice. Though the battle was a tactical defeat, its strategic success was immense. The Bosnian army was stopped and never reached Šabac. The time bought by the Nedić resistance was crucial. Thanks to their sacrifice, the siege of Šabac held, and the city was taken on May 1st, just 3 days after Čokešina. This victory was vital for the morale of the uprising, and gave the Serbs control over an important western stronghold. For their exceptional heroism and conscious sacrifice, German historian Leopold Ranke called this event the Serbian Thermopylae, drawing a parallel with the legendary Spartan stand in ancient Greece. Nedić brothers' sacrifice became a powerful moral foundation and inspiration for the continuation of the uprising, serving as a beacon of heroism at a time when the Serbian people were just beginning their struggle for freedom. The Čokešina monastery became a symbol of resistance and self-sacrifice, and the battle a lesson in the importance of unity and military coordination, whose absence led to isolation and death. The Battle of Čokešina remains a lasting monument to bravery and selfless sacrifice for freedom. Though tragic in its outcome, it demonstrated the unyielding determination of the Serbian people to fight for their liberty, regardless of the enemy's numbers. Future battles would bring new challenges and losses, but the memory of Čokešina and its fallen heroes would forever inspire rebel leaders and remind them of the price of freedom. This battle was a brutal lesson, but also a foundation upon which the future Serbian army and state would be built, with the understanding that unity is the key to survival and victory. The Battle of Čokešina, though a tactical defeat, stands as a lasting symbol of courage and selfless sacrifice in Serbian history. What do you think? How much did the sacrifice of the Nedić brothers and their Hajduk shape the spirit of the First Serbian Uprising, and was it, despite everything, a necessary price for freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments. The People's Rebellion had engulfed the entire Belgrade Pashalo as people rose up, determined to end the rule of fear and injustice. They successfully won several significant victories, such as those at Drupa, near Čokešina, and many towns and smaller places were liberated from Ottoman control. However, the four Dahijas still held firm power in the Pashaluk, and it was clear that this problem had to be solved for the uprising to continue successfully. In an effort to quell the growing conflict and regain control of the region, the Sublime Porte sent Bachir Aga to Belgrade. His main mission was to restore order in the Belgrade Pashaluk. Bachir Aga was authorized to rein in the rebellious Dahijas, and if necessary, eliminate all four of them. The Sultan thus attempted to appease the janissaries, whose privileges the Dahijas had usurped, to placate the Christian population, which was on the brink of revolt. Upon arrival, Bachir Aga, by a clever ruse, managed to isolate the Dahijas on the small Danube island of Adakal. Stranded and surrounded on all sides, the Dahijas realized that their only way out was to flee. They decided to head down the Danube River with about 80 of their most loyal men, hoping to find a safe haven. As soon as they were spotted near the riverbank, the Dahijas abandoned approximately 70 men in the village of Borcha, realizing that a smaller group would be easier to escape with. They continued their desperate flight towards Adakal Island, near Kladovo. News of the Dahijas' escape soon reached the Serbian rebels. Milenko Stojković immediately intercepted Bachir Aga and confronted him, threatening to kill him if he did not reveal where the Dahijas had fled. Under pressure and realizing his hands were tied, Bachir Aga finally relented and gave the Serbs permission to organize a pursuit party to hunt down the fleeing Dahijas on Adakal Island. In that crucial moment, Karadjordje Petrović, a key leader of the Serbian uprising, stood by Bachir Aga. His presence was a clear message of cooperation between the Serbian rebels and the Ottoman authorities, who wanted to remove the tyrannical Dahijas. This cooperation was rare and extremely significant, suggesting that shared interests could lead to a goal that was favorable to both sides, at least at that moment. The pursuit was successful and brought a definitive end to the rule. On the nights of July 24th and 25th, near the commander of Orshava, the place that had sheltered the Dahist, 2 Turks arrived, accompanied by 24 Serbs, carrying a firman from Bachir Aga and Tečić, ordering that the 4 Dahis must be executed without delay. Around midnight, the Serbs moved to carry out the executions, but resistance from the Turks arose. Kuchuk Ali fought fiercely, holding out almost until dawn. In the struggle, he managed to kill 1 Turk and 4 Serbs before being overpowered. The others were executed earlier that night. Their heads were severed and sent to Belgrade, proof of the mission's completion. The entire operation was led by the Serbian commander Milenko Stojković, whose determination ensured that the long-awaited justice for the atrocities of the Dahis was finally served. After this, Bachir Aga, as a sign of goodwill and as part of the agreement, appointed 20 Serbian knezes, granting them administrative control over various towns and villages. In doing so, he effectively fulfilled the key demands of the Serbian rebels, which represented a major step towards autonomy. This not only freed the people from the brutal Dahijas, but also gave the Serbs their first chance at local self-government, which was unprecedented in their history up to that point. This moment marked a critical turning point in the Serbian uprising, showing that through cooperation and strategic action, the rebels could challenge Ottoman authority and achieve tangible victories. After the brutal killing of the Dahijas, the renegade janissary leaders who had previously oppressed the Serbian people, the Ottoman authorities attempted to reassert control. Hafiz Pasha, the new Ottoman governor of the Belgrade Pashalik, was dispatched with an army of approximately 15,000 soldiers, with the task of crushing the uprising and restoring order. However, the Serbs, aware of the approaching threat, prepared thoroughly for the confrontation with the vastly superior enemy. The Serbian forces, numbering between 2,000 and 2,500 fighters, were led by prominent commanders Petar Dobrnjak, Milenko Stojković, and Stojan Kozarac. Anticipating the Ottoman attack, they chose the hilly terrain near Ivankovac for their defensive positions, wisely using the natural landscape to compensate for their numerical disadvantage. One of the key defensive measures employed by the Serbs was the construction of 3 fortifications, known as Šančevi. These trenches and wooden palisades were hastily but expertly erected in just 2 days under the supervision of Petar Dobrnjak. The largest redoubt, called the Great Shanak, stretched approximately 200 by 70 steps and was built in an oval shape. Trenches about half a meter deep and wide formed the base of these fortifications, surrounded by palisades standing 2.5 meters high. The wooden walls were reinforced with layers arranged to allow defenders to fire through narrow openings, while protecting them from Ottoman gunfire. 2 smaller redoubts served as auxiliary defensive points and reserves, strategically placed on nearby hills Ludopola and Mučevac that dominated the entire area. Together, these fortifications created a layered defensive system that maximized the defenders' ability to repel attacks and maintain control over the key access routes. As the Ottoman forces approached, Hafiz Pasha positioned his troops on the high ground known as Vizier's Hill and attempted to flank the Serbian defensive lines by sending 2 columns around Ivankovac. The Ottoman army relied heavily on cavalry charges, aiming to break the Serbian lines with shock and speed. However, the terrain favored the defenders. The steep hills, dense plum orchards, and the Ivankovac River limited cavalry maneuvers and forced the Ottomans to engage the entrenched Serbian fighters head-on. Throughout the day, Hafiz Pasha ordered around 20 assaults on the Serbian redoubts. Each attack met fierce resistance, and the palisades and trenches effectively absorbed the Ottoman musket fire, while Serbian marksmen responded with deadly accuracy. Despite repeated attempts, the Ottomans could not break through the Serbian defenses. The lack of artillery further handicapped their assault as the Ottoman infantry struggled to dismantle the fortifications. Casualties mounted on both sides, but especially among the attackers, who were forced to retreat each time. The Serbian commanders demonstrated remarkable tactical acumen. Petar Dobrnjak coordinated the defense, ordering reserves to reinforce points under pressure and organizing counterattacks whenever an opportunity arose. Milenko Stojković and Stojan Kozarac led key sections of the defense, inspiring the fighters with their resolve and courage. As the sun began to set, Hafiz Pasha himself was wounded, and the Ottoman forces, demoralized and depleted, began a retreat towards Pericin. They left behind weapons, supplies, and a significant number of casualties. The Serbs counted around 40 dead, including their wounded commander, Karastevan, from the village of Prova, who succumbed to his injuries shortly after the battle. The victory at Ivankovac had profound consequences. It was the first time Serbian insurgents had decisively defeated an Ottoman army in open combat, proving that the rebellion was not just a series of scattered uprisings, but a coordinated movement capable of defending its gains. This success encouraged further mobilization throughout Serbia, prompted many hesitant villagers to join the uprising, and secured greater confidence in the leadership of Đorđe Petrović. Politically, the battle forced the Porte to reconsider its approach. The Serbs began negotiations seeking recognition and autonomy, transforming the uprising into a broader political struggle for self-government, not just a rebellion. At the same time, the battle attracted the attention of foreign powers, especially Russia, whose interest in supporting the Christian Slavs in the Balkans would play a crucial role in the years to come. Despite the victory, the struggle was far from over. The Battle of Ivankovac marked a turning point but did not end the Ottoman efforts to suppress the uprising. The Serbs had to remain vigilant, constantly defending their positions and organizing resistance across a wide area. Yet the successful defense of the Šančevi and the defeat of Hafiz Pasha's forces gave the rebels renewed hope and a clear example of what could be achieved through unity and tactical preparation. The Battle of Ivankovac remains a symbol of Serbian resistance and the beginning of the path toward final liberation, and its lessons in defensive warfare, leadership, and resilience are still studied and remembered in Serbian history.
The year is 1806. After the great victory at Ivankovac, the Serbian uprising spreads beyond the borders of the Belgrade Pashaluk. A massive Turkish army advances from two directions from the west, coming from Bosnia, and from the south, coming from Niš. On the field of Mišar, Karadjordje leads his 7,000 insurgents to face 40,000 Turks, supported by Napoleon's artillery. The uprising had expanded beyond the borders of the Belgrade Pashaluk, and the Ottoman authorities aimed to crush it decisively. Karadjordje gathered his forces and decided to make a stand at Mišar, a strategic location near the town of Šabac. Before moving to Mišar, Karadjordje spent several days coordinating with local leaders and inspecting the terrain. He chose Mišar for its natural defensive advantages. The battlefield is a plateau with a slight elevation, bounded by the Sava River on one side and dense forests on the other. This limited the directions from which the enemy could attack, reducing the risk of being outflanked. Upon arrival, Karadjordje ordered his men to start constructing defensive earthworks, trenches and ramparts to strengthen their position. These fortifications extended approximately 600 steps from the cliff edge of the hill, designed to provide a clear line of sight and effective firing positions against the advancing Ottoman troops. The Serbian insurgents numbered around 7,000, a mix of infantry and cavalry, mostly armed with muskets and sabers. They faced an Ottoman force estimated at 40,000 soldiers, which included elite infantry units, cavalry, and artillery support provided by French allies of the Ottomans. The Ottoman forces at Mišar were not only formidable in numbers but also benefited from evolving military technologies of the early 19th century. During this period, the Ottoman Empire maintained a complex and pragmatic relationship with Napoleonic France. Although a full military alliance was not permanent, the Ottomans received military advisors and modern artillery pieces influenced by French designs and tactics. The soldiers were well armed and supported by artillery units supplied by French military advisors allied with the Ottoman Empire. Karadjordje's choice to hold the high ground at Mišar allowed his forces to monitor enemy movements from afar. The positioning also exploited the natural obstacles. The dense forest prevented encirclement on one flank, while the Sava River limited maneuvers on the other. This forced the Ottoman army to approach largely from the front, where the Serbian defenses were strongest. Inside the trenches, the insurgents maintained strict discipline. Flag bearers held up signals to coordinate troop movements. The men were aware that their survival and the fate of the uprising depended on holding this position. The battle began on the 13th of August, 1806, with the Ottoman forces launching their assault against the Serbian defensive positions. Karadjordje's men were entrenched behind earthworks that spanned roughly 600 steps across the plateau, providing them a solid tactical advantage. The trenches were constructed with careful attention to defense, allowing the infantry to fire upon the approaching enemy while remaining protected. The Ottoman army, numbering around 40,000, advanced confidently, supported by artillery crews operating Napoleonic cannons. Their first attempts focused on breaking the Serbian lines by frontal assaults. The artillery barrage caused considerable damage to the Serbian trenches, but the defenders, knowing the terrain and battle conditions well, held their ground firmly. Twice the Ottoman infantry launched direct charges against the Serbian positions. Each time, the disciplined Serbian musketeers repelled the attackers with well-coordinated volleys of gunfire. Despite their numerical superiority, the Ottomans struggled to penetrate the trenches. The narrow battlefield and natural obstacles, including the nearby Sava River and dense forest, prevented effective Ottoman flanking maneuvers. In response to the infantry's failure, the Ottomans deployed their cavalry in an attempt to break the defenses. This cavalry charge was led by Kulen Captain, a prominent commander of the Bosnian cavalry known for his aggressive tactics. His forces surged forward and managed to reach the Serbian ramparts, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat. At the ramparts, fierce hand-to-hand fighting broke out. The Serbian defenders, though outnumbered, fought fiercely with muskets, sabers, and improvised weapons. The battle at the trench lines became chaotic, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Then, in a decisive moment, Karadjordje fired a cannon shot in an unusual direction. The unexpected shot caused confusion among both the Serbian ranks and the Ottoman forces. Many thought it was a mistake or a misfire, but only the cavalry commander leading the reserve troops understood that this was a prearranged signal to begin the cavalry counterattack. Following the cannon signal, Karadjordje ordered the Serbian cavalry, held in reserve behind the trenches, to launch a counterattack. The cavalry divided into two groups to strike at critical points of the Ottoman assault. One group, led by Luka Lazarjević, charged directly at the Ottoman cavalry that had breached the ramparts. The other group, commanded by Protomateja Nenadović and Lazar Mutap, targeted the Ottoman artillery positions and the vizier's headquarters behind the front lines. The sudden Serbian cavalry attack caught the Ottomans by surprise. The artillerymen, although they turned their cannons toward the cavalry, were unable to halt the charge effectively. Protomateja's group swiftly overran the artillery positions, neutralizing the Ottoman firepower and throwing the enemy command into disarray. Meanwhile, Luka Lazarjevic's cavalry clashed fiercely with Kulin, Captain's Bosnian horsemen, in a deadly duel near the river Dumaka. Both commanders displayed exceptional bravery. At one point, their pistols misfired during close combat, forcing them into brutal hand-to-hand fighting with sabers and other weapons. Luka was struck multiple times by Kulin's saber, breaking his sword and wounding him severely. However, in a desperate move, Luka struck Kulin with an iron ramrod, knocking him down. Although wounded, Luka managed to retreat to the Serbian lines, where he later recovered. Kulin captain succumbed to his injuries and was carried away dead by Ottoman troops. His saber, inscribed with honors, was seized by Miloš Stojicević Posorac, a Serbian fighter. Following the cavalry attacks, the Serbian infantry opened the gates of their fortifications and launched a decisive offensive. The momentum shifted, and the Ottoman forces began to retreat in disorder. The battle concluded in the early evening with a decisive Serbian victory. The Ottomans suffered significant losses, including prominent leaders such as Sinan Pasha of Gorazde, Kulin captain, and Mehmed Vidajić, along with his sons. The victory at Mišar was a turning point in the First Serbian Uprising, demonstrating the effectiveness of disciplined defense combined with timely cavalry counterattacks. It shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility in the region and bolstered Serbian morale. The Battle of Mišar was a costly but decisive victory for the Serbian insurgents. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers were killed or wounded, including key commanders such as Kulin captain and Sinan Pasha. The Serbian forces also suffered losses but managed to hold their ground and secure a crucial strategic win. For Karadjordje, this battle marked arguably the greatest victory of his military career. It shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility and boosted the morale of the Serbian uprising significantly. However, the war was far from over. From the south, a new threat was emerging. Ottoman advancing from the direction of Niš were moving toward the fortress of Deligrad, which was already under siege. This posed a serious danger not only to Deligrad but to the entire Serbian uprising. The victory at Mišar was thus both a major triumph and a reminder of the continuing struggle ahead. The triumph at Mišar not only elevated Karadjordje's status as a military leader, but also inspired greater unity among the Serbian insurgents. The year is 1806. Karadjordje has just secured what is considered the greatest victory of his career, the triumph at Mišar. But the struggle is far from over. A massive Ottoman army, led by Hafiz Pasha, is advancing from Niš towards Deligrad, determined to crush the Serbian uprising. Karadjordje immediately sets out to stop them, knowing that the fate of the rebellion hangs in the balance. In 1806, while the echoes of victory at Mišar still rang across Serbia, the southern front became the new stage of war. Hafiz Pasha was advancing from Niš with a powerful army, determined to push down the Morava Valley toward the heart of the uprising. The key to this defense lay at Deligrad, a stronghold raised only months earlier with the purpose of closing that road forever. The decision to fortify Deligrad had been made at the close of 1805, when it became clear that the rebellion would inevitably spread beyond its original borders. For this task, Karadjordje relied on Vucho Žikić, a former Austrian officer and skilled engineer. With his brother Jovan and groups of volunteers from still occupied southern lands, Žikić managed to construct a formidable position on the right bank of the South Morava, directly on the Constantinople road. The fortifications were laid out with precision. What began as a single trench soon developed into a network of redoubts arranged in a triangular formation, supported by bastions for artillery and iron gates. Beneath the ramparts stretched underground shelters, large enough to hide entire battalions with their horses, all reinforced with timber and thick layers of earth. Palisades crowned the defenses, while trenches and obstacles guarded every approach. Supplies of food, water, and ammunition, along with cannons taken from the fortress of Smederevo, ensured the defenders could endure even the longest siege. Đikić would not live to see the great test of his work, for he fell shortly after the construction was finished. Command then passed to Petar Dobrinjak, under whose leadership the fortress became the bulwark of the south. On the opposite bank of the Morava, the Topoljak fortification was raised, and together they formed a locked barrier across the valley. By the summer of 1806, as the Ottoman columns pressed forward, Deligrad stood ready not just as earth and timber, but as the line on which the fate of the Serbian uprising would be decided. Ibrahim Pasha, an Albanian nobleman from the influential Bushatli family, was the supreme commander of the large Ottoman army tasked with crushing the Serbian uprising. As the governor of Rumelia and Scutari, he could recruit troops from a vast area, Gjakova and Peć, through Prizren, Pristina, and Vranje, all the way to Edirne, Vidin, and Leskovac. This allowed him to assemble a massive force numbering tens of thousands of soldiers. The first strike was assigned to Shahid Pasha, commanding 16 men stationed between Niš and the Morava. Underestimating the Serbian fortifications, he advanced toward Deligrad on July 13, 1806, with only 40 soldiers. However, Stanoje Glavaš, commanding the sector at the time, spotted the enemy in time and forced him to retreat. Just 3 days later, on July 16, Shahid Pasha attempted another attack, now with greater numbers, but again he was repelled, this time with the help of Mladen Milovanović and his men from Topoljak on the left bank of the Morava. The Ottomans were driven back to Niš, and the Serbs captured cannons, ammunition, and military supplies. These defeats led Ibrahim Pasha to replace Shahid and personally assume command. With reinforcements arriving from Edirne, his army swelled to approximately 55 men. At the end of July, he marched toward Deligrad, assuming Karadjordje would be tied down in the west after Mišar. However, Karadjordje, fresh from his victory, arrived on the southern front. He brought significant reinforcements and personally took command of the insurgent forces. On August 22, 1806, the Ottomans launched a full-scale frontal attack. Their tactic was simple: overwhelm the Serbian lines with sheer numbers. Yet every assault resulted in heavy losses, as Karadjordje and his roughly 10 men held the line and repeatedly pushed the attackers back. Realizing that direct attacks were ineffective, Ibrahim Pasha attempted to exhaust the defenders and stretch their lines. The fighting continued for weeks, often in bloody clashes and counterattacks. It seemed that Ottoman numbers and superior weaponry might finally prevail, but Karadjordje had a decisive plan. At the critical moment, Serbian cavalry struck from the flanks Mladen Milovanović on the right and Stanoje Glavaš on the left. Their sudden attack hit the Ottoman rear, throwing the enemy into complete panic. Simultaneously, Karadjordje and Petar Dobrinjak launched a counterattack from within the fortress. The Ottoman army collapsed. After nearly 6 weeks of relentless fighting, the siege failed. The Serbs broke the blockade, forced the enemy to retreat, and captured cannons, ammunition, and the Ottoman military treasury. The Battle of Deligrad ended as one of the most crushing defeats for the Ottoman forces during the First Serbian Uprising. In just 10 days, Karadjordje had achieved 2 brilliant victories at Mišar and Deligrad, successfully defending the uprising and thwarting Ottoman plans. Defeated, the Ottoman Porte was forced to negotiate, with Austria and Russia mediating, and issued a firman granting amnesty for all Serbian actions during the first 2 years of the uprising. These victories not only preserved the uprising, but also demonstrated the strategic genius and resilience of the Serbian forces. The courage and discipline shown at Deligrad inspired further resistance and strengthened the morale of the nation. For years to come, these battles would be remembered as defining moments in the struggle for Serbian independence. Karadjordje's leadership had proven decisive, showing that determination and strategy could overcome even overwhelming odds. The defeated Deligrad struck a heavy blow to the Ottoman Empire. Ibrahim Pasha, though a powerful governor from the prestigious Bushatli family, lost his prestige, and the Porte for the first time was forced to acknowledge that the Serbian uprising was not a passing revolt, but a real war. For the Serbs, these victories brought more than military security. Karadjordje, in the eyes of the people, became the true vojd, the symbol of resistance, and a leader capable of outwitting and overpowering a much stronger enemy. His name was now spoken with both respect and awe, while his authority among the Serbian dukes grew stronger than ever. News of the Serbian success reached the capitals of Europe. In Vienna and St. Petersburg, the rebels began to be seen as a nation capable of fighting for its own freedom, opening the way for Serbia's first steps toward diplomatic recognition and the attention of the great powers. Thus, after Deligrad, the Serbian struggle entered a new phase, not only as a rebellion against the Sultan, but as a movement gaining international significance and a clear historical mission. The year is 1806. The Serbian rebels have won two glorious victories. At Mišar, where they crushed a far superior enemy, and at Deligrad, where nearly 30,000 Ottomans were left dead on the battlefield. Strengthened by glory and confidence, the insurgents now turn their eyes toward Belgrade. But this time, alongside cannons and swords, diplomacy steps onto the stage. Serbia turns to Russia and seeks peace with the Ottomans. Encouraged by their recent successes, the Serbian insurgents launched a new offensive. Stanoje Glavaš burned Prokuplige and advanced deep into the regions of Lab, Banjska and Brvenik. Karadjordje pushed with his forces as far as Niš, while Milenko Stojković marched eastward toward Vidin. Serbia was no longer on the defensive. The uprising was beginning to take the shape of a true war of liberation. In these circumstances, at the end of July 1806, the Serbian envoy Petar Ičko arrived in Constantinople. A skilled merchant and diplomat, and with the mediation of the Patriarch of Constantinople, he began negotiations with the Porte. His mission was far from simple. He had to win concessions for a people who had only just risen from oppression. Yet Ičko knew how to seize the moment. The Ottomans were weakened, and relations with Russia were already on the brink of war. By September 1806, an oral agreement had been reached, later known as Ičko's Peace. Its terms provided: 1. Serbia would pay tribute in a fixed annual sum, collected by an imperial muhassel. 2. The muhassel would be accompanied only by a limited number of attendants. 3. All public offices would be carried out by Serbs under the Sultan's authority. 4. The janissaries, Kurđalihi, and other violent Turks would be expelled from Serbia, and the borders would be guarded by the Serbs themselves. In September, Ičko returned to Serbia together with the muhassel. A month later, in October, the insurgent assembly in Smederevo accepted these conditions and sent Ičko back to Constantinople to confirm them, firmly and finally. Yet the peace never became permanent. No written treaty existed to guarantee the promises of the Porte. The fate of Serbia now rested on the wider conflict of empires. At that very moment, Russia seized Bucharest and entered into war with the Ottomans. The Serbs suddenly became its natural ally. Instead of counseling obedience to the Sultan, Russia now openly urged them to continue the uprising. Thus, Ičko's peace remained an unfinished agreement, the first Serbian attempt to secure freedom not by force of arms, but through diplomacy. Petar Ičko, together with the muhassel Hasan Aga sent by the Porte, returned to Serbia on September 10, 1806, without a written firman, relying solely on verbal promises. Karadjordje decided to march on Belgrade, the city that had symbolized Ottoman authority in Serbia for decades. Since May 1804, the insurgents had been gradually tightening the siege around the city, but the first serious clashes with the Turks occurred only in 1806 near the Topčider River, when the insurgents secured positions closer to the city. By November 1806, Karadjordje arrived beneath Belgrade with about 25 soldiers and 40 cannons. The insurgents took up key positions. Sima Marković, with 3 men, guarded the approach along the Sava River, tasked with penetrating the Varoš Gate, located at today's Kosančiće Venac. Karadjordje and Janko Katic held the front at Tašmajdan, where the main camp was established. Milan Obrenović and his Rudničani occupied positions near the Kareva Bridge, while Mladen Milovanović and the Kragujevac detachments were at High Dučka Česma. Vasa Čarapić, with the men from Groka, was positioned along the Carigrad road, and Miloše Petrović Trnavac, with 3 Zero fighters, advanced on the Sava Gate near the Velike Stepenice. Along the Danube, near the Vidin Gate, Stanoje Glavaš and Vule Kolorak held positions, while Luka Lazarević and Prota Matija Nenadović also took part in the siege. A key role was played by the defector from the Ottoman side, Đorđe Petrović, who, along with Uzun Mirko Apostolović and a small group of brave companions, planned to infiltrate the city first and open the gates from within. Speaking fluent Turkish, they successfully passed the Ottoman guard at the Sava Gate, which mistakenly let them through, thinking they were Ottoman soldiers. They then killed the guards and allowed the insurgents to enter the city. The main assault began on the night of December 12, 1806 November 30, Old Style, 2 hours past midnight, during Bayram. The insurgents advanced silently, using cold weapons, with Konda and Uzun Mirko leading the first penetration through the Sava Gate. Soon after, the Varoš Gate was also breached. Street fighting quickly spread, and the Turks opened fire with firearms, creating chaos in the city. Karadjordje commanded from the camp at Tašmajdan, coordinating attacks on the central gates. During the fighting, Vasa Čarapić was mortally wounded while leading the assault on the Stambol Gate, which inspired and motivated the Serbian fighters. By 10 in the morning, most of the city was under insurgent control. In the 10-hour-long battle, about 300 Turks and 54 Serbian insurgents were killed. The insurgents also captured the strongest positions in Belgrade, including Stambol Gate, further boosting morale. During the night, trenches were dug, and cannons were positioned to threaten the upper fortress. Karadjordje enforced strict discipline. He forbade vengeance or violence against the civilian population and prisoners, personally supervising and declaring, "Do not harm Turkish innocents. The Turks' atrocities were against us, but their children have done nothing wrong." 2 insurgents who disobeyed this order were executed brutally and displayed as an example. Although the city was captured on December 12, some Ottoman forces remained in Belgrade Fortress. The siege continued until January 8, 1807, when the Turks surrendered and Sulejman Pasha, along with his entourage, left the city. After more than 3 centuries, Belgrade finally became the center of a free Serbia. The liberation of Belgrade marked a turning point not only in the First Serbian Uprising, but also in the broader struggle for national identity. With the Ottoman garrison expelled and the city firmly under Serbian control, Karadjordje and his commanders consolidated power and organized defenses to prevent the Turks from returning. The bravery of individuals like Vasa Čarapić, Đorđe Konda, and Uzun Mirko Apostolović became legendary, symbolizing the determination and courage of the Serbian people. Belgrade's fall demonstrated that disciplined, coordinated action, combined with knowledge of the terrain and careful planning, could overcome even the strongest fortifications. This victory inspired further uprisings across Serbia and strengthened the resolve of the insurgents to continue the fight for independence. The liberation of Belgrade was not the end of the struggle, but a crucial step toward the creation of a free and independent Serbia. By defeating the strongest Ottoman fortress in the Balkans, the insurgents demonstrated their determination and courage, giving the people a symbol of freedom and hope for the future. This victory strengthened the morale of the fighters, solidified the organization of the resistance, and laid the groundwork for further liberation efforts. From that moment on, Belgrade became the center of the fight for independence and a symbol of Serbian national unity. The year is 1807, and the Serbian uprising has reached its peak. The rebels have captured the largest city of their Pashaluk, Belgrade. The Serbs now decide to push the uprising in 2 directions, toward the Drina and Bosnia, and toward Negotin, where on the Danube they will once again face the Ottomans. There, new problems and great battles await them. Milenko Stojković was the first to set out toward the Danube with around 30 men, determined to break through Ottoman lines and establish direct contact with Russian forces. On his way, he secured Porech, but his attempt to take Negotin failed, forcing him to retreat toward the village of Stubik. There, realizing the danger of a counterattack, he fortified his positions with ditches, palisades, and earthworks, determined to hold at any cost. The Ottoman commander of Vidin, Mula Pasha, soon learned of the Serbian presence in the Krajina and gathered between 50 and 80 troops supported by notorious Karadjordje mercenaries under Ali Gushinac. By May 1807, the Ottomans launched their offensive, forcing Milenko and his men into their trenches at Stubik and surrounding them. At the same time, Ottoman forces entrenched themselves at Malajnica, tightening the noose. The plan, aided by a French officer named Mariash, was not to storm recklessly, but to starve the Serbs into submission. Inside the trenches, the situation grew dire. The defenders faced constant harassment, with musket fire and skirmishes day and night. Food supplies ran out, water was scarce, and the men grew weak. Yet, morale held, for Milenko reminded his soldiers that they were fighting not only for survival but to open the road to their Russian allies. Many swore they would rather die behind the ramparts than surrender. Meanwhile, Karadjordje received word of Milenko's plight. Abandoning his offensive toward Bosnia, he turned east, gathering about 500 men from Smederevo and Groka. When his army reached Stubik in mid-June, the effect was immediate. Serbian morale soared, songs were sung from the trenches, and the Ottomans realized that the rebels were far from beaten. But the Ottomans counterattacked fiercely. Even after daring Serbian charges, the arrival of fresh forces from Vidin struck the Serbian right flank and drove them back to their starting positions. Still, Karadjordje refused to yield. On June 5th, he ordered a new assault. In brutal hand-to-hand combat, the Serbs forced open a gap and rescued Milenko from encirclement. On the Malajnica front, Halil Gushinac's men found themselves nearly overrun, with Serbian fire cutting deeper into their defenses every day. The front line now stretched into a stalemate, with neither side willing to withdraw. At this critical point, the long-awaited Russian help finally arrived. General Isaev crossed the Danube with around 10 troops, 600 infantry of the seasoned Olonets battalion, 200 Cossacks, and 200 Serbian and Russian volunteers. Their disciplined ranks, gleaming bayonets, and battle experience filled the Serbian rebels with new hope. Milenko himself rode out with 300 horsemen to greet them, forging the first open bond of alliance on Serbian soil. The meeting was symbolic. Orthodox brothers in arms preparing to strike together at their common enemy. On June 30th, Isaev and Karadjordje personally inspected the Ottoman fortifications. Their plan was daring, a coordinated dawn attack, with Russian artillery paving the way. At first light on July 1st, thunder echoed across the Danube Valley as Russian cannons roared against Mula Pasha's camp. Smoke and fire rained on the Ottoman trenches, sowing confusion. Then, under the cover of this bombardment, Milenko Stojkovic with 500 Branicevic, Vuhika Vulicevic with 600 Smederevic, the Olonets infantry, the Cossacks, and Serbian volunteers surged forward. The assault was ferocious. Rebels stormed into the enemy lines and vicious hand-to-hand fighting broke out. Bayonets clashed, sabers flashed, and the cries of men echoed across the fields. Many Ottoman soldiers panicked, abandoning their positions as Serbian infantry and Russian allies carved through their ranks. Karadjordje unleashed his cavalry, which swept across the plain, cutting down fugitives and turning retreat into chaos. Mula Pasha himself was struck and badly wounded, barely escaping on horseback toward Vidin. Ali Gushinac too was forced to retreat with what remained of his mercenaries. When the battle ended, the Ottomans had lost over 500 dead and another 1,000 wounded. On the Serbian side, about 200 had fallen, while Russian casualties numbered around 130. The victory at Stubik and Malajnica carried immense significance. It was the first time Serbian and Russian blood had been shed together in the fight for freedom. Karadjordje hailed the Russians as true brothers, and the alliance born in those days would echo far beyond 1807. Not only did it strengthen the Serbian position in the uprising, but it also marked the beginning of a broader diplomatic and military partnership that tied the fate of the Serbian Revolution to the great power struggles of Europe. For the Serbian rebels, this triumph was more than a battlefield success. It was proof that their struggle was part of something greater, a fight in which their sacrifice would be remembered alongside that of their allies. And though the uprising would face grave challenges in the years ahead, the story of Stubik and Malajnica lived on as a symbol of defiance, unity, and the unbreakable will to be free. Marked a turning point in the Serbian struggle for independence. They demonstrated that determination, careful planning, and unity could overcome even the most formidable foes. Beyond the immediate military victory, these engagements strengthened local confidence, inspired surrounding communities, and forged a model of collaboration that would guide future campaigns. The courage displayed on those fields became a lasting legacy, a testament to the power of strategy combined with resolve, and a reminder that freedom requires both bravery and foresight. Yet the greatest weight of these victories lay not in the numbers or the ground gained, but in the blood that was shed together. For the first time, Russian soldiers fell beside Serbian rebels, their sacrifice uniting two struggles into one and lifting the uprising beyond the bounds of a local revolt. That shared loss gave the Serbian fight a new dignity. It became part of a broader struggle that crossed borders and tied nations in brotherhood. From Stubik and Malajnica onward, the Serbian cause bore the mark of international solidarity, proof that freedom defended together could never again be fought for alone. With victories blazing across their banners and allies now at their side, the insurgents stood at the very height of the First Uprising, their dream of liberation closer than ever before. The year is 1809. The uprising was in question as the Ottomans flooded the hill of Čegar near Niš. The Ottomans outnumbered the Serbs 3 to 4 times. The Serbs were losing the battle, but then, like a thunderbolt from a clear sky, an explosion blew up the entire trench, causing enormous losses to the Ottomans, and remained forever recorded in Serbian tradition as a hero. This is the story of the Battle of Čegar. The victories won brought fame, but new great threats were already knocking at the door. Although at first it seemed that the 5-year uprising was entering its final phase, the Ottoman advance put into question everything that had been created until then. After the victories at Stubik and Malajnica, a lull followed. It lasted throughout 1808, after the Russian defeats in the war with Napoleon. The people used this time to repair destroyed homes, the army rested, and the leaders in Belgrade organized the government and listened to the voices of allies arriving from all directions. An administrative council called the Pravitel Jestavujući Sovjet was introduced. In 1809, relations between Turkey and Russia became tense again. After fruitless negotiations, conflict broke out once more. On March 12, 1809, the Porte declared war on Russia, and on March 21st, Russia declared war on the Porte. The Russians sent the Serbs aid, 1,000 rifles and 30,000 bullets. Serbia launched an offensive against Turkey. Karadjordje moved toward Montenegro. Milenko Stojković maintained contact with the Russians. Luka Lazarević and Simo Marković were sent across the Drina into Bosnia, and Đorđe Petrović was assigned to attack Niš. The Požarevac, Ćuprija, Paraćin, Rajanj, and the Aleksinac armies marched toward Niš, along with some Krajina and Livčani fighters and a battalion of the regular army. In total, around 16,000 men gathered at Deligrad on April 21st and marched toward Niš. Hajduk Veliko also assisted, operating along the Niš-Pirot route. According to Serbian sources, there were only 3,000 Turks in Niš. But the city had great strategic importance, so a large force was sent against it. The Serbian army advanced slowly and reached Niš on April 27th, where 6 trenches were established around the village of Kamenica. The first and largest was at Čegar with Duke Stevan Sindelic, the second in Gornji Matijevac near today's restored Latin church with Petar Dobranjak, the third northwest of Kamenica with Duke Ilija Barjak Terević, the fourth in Kamenica itself with Đorđe Petrović, the fifth above Kamenica with Duke Poljie Matejic, and the sixth in Donji Matejevac. Sindelic trench was rectangular, divided in the middle by a rifle trench. On one side were the tents of the Duke and the army, and on the other, the gunpowder storage, into which Duke Sindelic fired. Đorđe Petrovic's demand to attack Niš immediately was not accepted. It was decided to wait with the attack and execute a strong blockade of the city. The Turkish army received reinforcements of over 20,000 soldiers. Ismail Bey from Edirne and Thessaloniki, Ahmed Pasha from Vranje, and Karafedza and Shashin Pasha from Leskovac. The battle began in the morning of May 19th, 1809, May 31st in the new calendar. The Turks charged 4 times, but Sindelic's Uskoci repelled them. Eventually, through those who had fallen and filled the trenches around the fort, the Turks entered the trench. The real clash had begun. Rifle fighting turned into hand-to-hand combat with gun stocks, knives, and grappling by the throat and hair. Turkish reinforcements kept arriving, and Sindelic was left alone, seeing that he could not drive the Turks out of the trench that many Serbs had died, and not wanting to fall alive into Turkish hands, Stevan Sindelic fired his pistol into the gunpowder store, ending the battle. After this, around 16,000 Turks and 4,000 Serbs lay on Čegar. After the battle, Huršid Pasha ordered the heads of the fallen Serbs to be skinned, filled with straw, and sent to the Sultan in Constantinople as proof of his victory. However, the Sultan, horrified by the sight, ordered them returned and buried. From those heads, Huršid built the Çelikula at the entrance of Niš as a warning to anyone who dared raise a voice against the Sultan. The increase in Turkish forces did not stop. Hearing about the tragedy at Čegar, Karadjordje lifted the siege of Pazar and hurried to Morava. Huršid Pasha continued his campaign, capturing Sokobanja and reaching Deligrad, where at the end of June, 1809, new battles began. The insurgents under Petar Dobranjak initially repelled attacks, but soon Ottoman reinforcements of almost 40,000 soldiers arrived. By August 23rd, the Serbs, exhausted and without ammunition, were forced to abandon Deligrad. The Turks captured Ćuprija and advanced along the Morava. The Serbs withdrew their army and people northward, burning Jagodina to slow the enemy. The Ottoman advance was terrifying. They reached Požarevac, burning everything in their path. In those moments of despair, it seemed all was lost. Many leaders left Serbia, some fleeing with Russian envoys. But one man remained to encourage the people, and Karadjordje Obradović. He urged them not to lose faith in God and in the righteous struggle. And indeed, help would come at the right time. Serbian bravery was exemplified by the Reserva Duke Stevan Sindelic. To prevent falling into Turkish hands, he fired his pistol into an underground gunpowder magazine, causing the deaths of all Serbian soldiers and many Turks. In revenge, and as a warning, the Turkish Pasha ordered the Çelikula to be built at the entrance to Niš, incorporating 952 skulls of fallen insurgents. Today it stands as a permanent symbol of the Serbs' struggle for independence. French traveller Alphonse de Lamartine recorded during his visit to the Çelikula in 1833. Let the Serbs preserve this monument. It will teach their children the value of a nation's independence and the price it was paid. Due to the defeat at Čegar, Karadjordje was forced to abandon further campaigns in Old Serbia. Meanwhile, the Rumelian vizier captured eastern Serbia up to the Great Morava, but Karadjordje managed to organize the defense, and favorable winter conditions helped the insurgents as the Turks were forced to retreat. Prince Milan Obrenović erected the first monument at Čegar on July 4, 1878, in honor of Duke Stevan Sindelic and his heroes. The current tower-shaped monument was built in 1927 by Russian architect Julian Dupont. Čegar and the Çelikula were restored in 2009 during the central celebration of the 200th anniversary of the battle. Year is 1809. Huršid Pasha drives the Serbs all the way to Požarevac. Many elders abandon Serbia, and the uprising is in its worst position ever. Karadjordje hesitates, but only Đorđe Petrović encourages him not to lose faith in God and assures him that help will come at the right moment. And then, suddenly, comes help. The new Russo-Turkish War. When a new wave of war erupted in 1809 between the Russian and Ottoman empires, the Serbs watched the conflict carefully, aware that their fate was inseparable from the course of this major European war. At that time, Karadjordje's Serbia was already exhausted. The severe defeats of 1809, especially at Čegar, had brought immense suffering, demoralized the insurgents, and left the path open for the Ottomans to penetrate deep into Serbian lands. Huršid Pasha, one of the most capable Ottoman commanders, was tasked with crushing the Serbian uprising. With around 30,000 soldiers, he advanced into the heart of Serbia, relying on the influence and strength of his prior victories. Initially, the Serbs felt fear and despair, as it was clear that local forces could not stand against such a powerful enemy on their own. At that moment, Russia entered the scene. Tsar Alexander I, already engaged in war with Napoleon, did not wish to leave the Balkans uncontested. His general, Prince Peter Bagration, launched a broad offensive along the entire Danube front in the summer of 1809. The Russians succeeded in crossing the Danube and occupying Dobruja, finally threatening the most important Ottoman fortresses in northern Bulgaria. The siege of Silistra forced a large portion of the Ottoman army southward, giving the Serbs a much-needed respite. Karadjordje seized this opportunity, and by December of that year, he had regained numerous lost territories, even advancing to Tikija on the Danube. This created a new basis for cooperation between the Serbs and the Russians. In 1810, an important change occurred. The Tsar replaced Bagration with Count Kamensky, a commander better suited for close cooperation with the Serbian insurgents. In July, the first units of roughly 2,500 Russian soldiers under Major General Kukat crossed the Danube and entered Serbian territory. This was a historic moment, the first time a regular Russian army came to Serbia as an ally of the insurgents. Karadjordje received them with great enthusiasm, as it meant the Serbian struggle was no longer alone. Meanwhile, the Ottomans did not rest. By August, Ismail Beg led some 30,000 troops in a new incursion into Serbia, advancing to and capturing Kruševac, securing a strong foothold in the heart of Serbian lands. At the same time, Russians and Serbs continued coordinated attacks, taking Brza Palanka on July 6th and Prahovo on August 23rd. They moved toward Kladovo, from where they could join Karadjordje in Deligrad. The joint forces then advanced to Jasica, where they were certain to encounter Huršid Pasha's troops. The confrontation at Jasica revealed that the terrain was unsuitable for a full-scale battle. Both Karadjordje and Russian Colonel Count Joseph O'Rourke realized it was risky to engage in open combat under conditions favoring the numerically superior enemy. Therefore, they decided to retreat toward Varvarin. This move proved wise. Varvarin field allowed for trench construction and a more advantageous deployment of Allied forces. While the Serbian-Russian units fortified their positions, O'Rourke briefly returned to Kladovo to bring reinforcements and secure supplies. Meanwhile, Huršid Pasha continued his campaign. With Ismail Beg and two other pashas, he advanced from Kruševac through Jasica, the villages of Shanak and Bošnjani, reaching Maskare, where on September 5, 1810, he established a camp opposite the Serbian-Russian forces. According to Vuk Karadžić, he addressed his commanders, pointing to the fortified insurgents. "You all say that a Serb dares not enter the field, but hides in the forest or buries himself among the bushes like a pig. And here is the Serb. Now we shall see who eats the emperor's bread." His words demonstrated both Ottoman confidence and surprise that the Serbs had abandoned guerrilla tactics and accepted battle in the open. The numerical odds were not favorable for the insurgents. Huršid Pasha commanded roughly 30,000 soldiers and 15 cannons, while the allied Serbian-Russian force had about 12,000 troops and the same number of cannons. However, O'Rourke compensated for the numerical disadvantage with excellent tactics. He organized the defense into 3 trenches, placing 4 rectangular formations behind them and personally standing in the front lines to encourage the soldiers. Russian Uhlans were positioned at the front, and both Serbian and Russian cavalry were deployed on the flanks. The left flank along the West Morava was led by Haduk Velko, while the right flank consisted of 500 Cossacks under Captain Nikita Nikic. Within the large trench, bastions with cannons and a gunpowder magazine were established, and the entire complex was built in the shape of an irregular pentagon. The parapets were reinforced with boards, and the ditches were deep enough to hold 10 to 15 men each. Although improvised, this fortification gave the Serbs and Russians a significant defensive advantage. Thus, on the eve of the Varvarin battle, Huršid Pasha's massive force faced Karadjordje, O'Rourke, and the Allied army. The numerical gap was enormous, but the Serbian-Russian side had morale, fresh alliances, and determination to prevent Serbia from being overrun. All conditions were set for a clash that would decide the fate of the uprising. At dawn on September 6, 1810, first attack came suddenly. The Ottomans surged in waves against the Serbian-Russian trenches, attempting to break the defensive lines through sheer force. According to Vuk Karadžić, the first charge was so intense that the Serbs feared they could not withstand it, but artillery fire from the Russian cannons caused confusion in the Ottoman ranks. The cannonade from the Serbian-Russian fortifications cut through the enemy lines, yet the Ottomans, driven by fanaticism and Huršid's orders, repeatedly charged again. What marked the Varvarin battle was the exceptional persistence of both sides. The Turks attacked multiple times, withdrew, and then assaulted again. Each attack accompanied by loud shouts, drum beats, and cavalry charges. The Serbian insurgents, for the first time since Čegar, demonstrated the lessons learned from past defeats. They no longer charged recklessly into the field, but held fortified positions and fought in an organized manner. Russian officers, especially Colonel O'Rourke, ensured that the fate of Čegar, where the Serbs lost due to open field combat, would not be repeated. The battle lasted for hours. At one point, the Ottomans managed to reach the trenches themselves. A Russian officer reported a terrible clash of bayonets and yatagans, where Serbs and Russians fought shoulder to shoulder, defending every inch of ground. Huršid Pasha sent his best cavalry units in an attempt to break the center, but Russian artillery positioned in the rear opened heavy fire, cutting through the cavalry and throwing them into disarray. Serbian infantry, under Karadjorde's personal supervision, withstood all assaults. Vuk Karadžić noted that Karadjordje, standing on a hill, encouraged his soldiers. "Do not fear, brothers. The Russians are with us and God is above us." This bolstered the troops. The Turks again tried to break through near Mascare but were repelled. A decisive moment came when the Russians launched a counterattack. Colonel O'Rourke ordered his men, after long defense, to charge. Supported by Serbian units, the Russians executed a bayonet assault from the trenches and pushed the Ottomans back. This sudden maneuver shattered the morale of the Ottoman army, which had not expected the defenders to go on the offensive. Huršid Pasha attempted to maintain order, but it was too late. Ottoman units began to disperse and retreat toward Kruševac. Ottoman losses were tremendous. Contemporary sources report thousands of dead and wounded, while Serbian and Russian casualties were comparatively minimal. Karadjordje later emphasized that this was the greatest Serbian victory in the war since 1804. Vuk Karadžić stressed that the Varvarin battle demonstrated that the Serbs were no longer the shattered people of Čegar, but an organized army capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with the Russians. The victory at Varvarin also had significant political importance. It showed that the Serbian uprising was not extinguished, could survive, and represented a factor in the broader European war between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. Huršid Pasha, who had advanced to Požarevac only a year earlier, was now forced to retreat and recognized that Serbia was no longer easy prey. In the national consciousness, this battle remained a moment of renewal after the horrors of Čegar, a moment when the Serbs, with Russian help, proved they could defeat the strongest Ottoman commanders on open ground. The year is 1810, and the Serbs have achieved a significant victory at Varvarin. The situation now looks much better than after Čegar, when it seemed that the Serbian uprising was nearing its end. Just as Russian assistance had saved the Serbs back then, now new threats are approaching them from Napoleon himself. At the end of September 1810, the Turks raised an army for one last attempt to strike Serbia across the Drina. Their powerful force numbered about 30,000 soldiers, commanded by Ali Pashavić. The Turkish goal was to capture Loznica, a strategic position where the Serbs had long resisted them. Loznica had been the site of earlier battles, and it held the west of the Pashalik firm. The Ottoman army crossed the Drina in small boats called shajkas and advanced towards Serbian territory. They reached the fields near Loznica, set up camp, and began besieging the Serbian position there. The Serbian garrison numbered only about 1,200 men, led by Antonije Bogićević. But despite being outnumbered, they held their ground. After 12 days of fierce fighting, food supplies began to run low. Bogićević sent a messenger to Šabac to seek help from Luka Lazarević. Lazarević gathered his men and marched south, while Jakov Nenadović also advanced from Banija to relieve Loznica. At the same time, Karadjordje, fresh from his victory at Varvarin, marched with reinforcements, including 200 Cossacks. The Serbian forces united near the village of Runjani, swelling their strength to around 10,000. Instead of going straight to Loznica, Karadjordje moved his army to the Tichar fields, where the Ottomans were encamped. Seeing this maneuver, Ali Pasha accepted Karadjordje's challenge and divided his army. One part moved toward Loznica, while the other faced Karadjordje. This division proved a grave mistake. The clash erupted into a fierce battle. The Serbs, though fewer, fought with determination. As evening fell, the fighting paused, but during the night, Serbian forces drew even closer to the Ottoman camp. Reinforcements soon arrived. Sima Marković joined with 2,000 men, strengthening Karadjorde's side. The next morning, the Turks launched a powerful assault, fighting desperately with muskets, bayonets, and sabers. The struggle lasted 8 hours, hand to hand. Despite their numbers, the Ottoman ranks began to falter under the Serbian pressure. Karadjordje led a cavalry charge through the Ottoman lines, while Antonije Bogićević ordered his men to storm out of their fortifications. The Ottomans broke and retreated toward the Drina, pursued by the Serbs. Serbian losses numbered around 120, while the Ottomans lost nearly 500. The victory at Loznica was celebrated as one of the great triumphs of the uprising, alongside Deligrad and Mišar. After the victory, Serbian society enjoyed a period of relative peace. In 1811, reforms strengthened the young state, trade with Austria flourished, and new administrative structures replaced the earlier system of local Nahija representatives. Yet political tensions persisted, as some voivodes opposed Karadjorde's leadership. Meanwhile, Europe faced greater upheavals. Napoleon Bonaparte's ambitions threatened Russia, forcing it to conclude peace with the Ottomans. On the 28th of May 1812, the Treaty of Bucharest ended hostilities between Russia and Turkey. Serbia, dissatisfied with its terms, was left isolated. Only 13 days later, Napoleon invaded Russia, shifting Ottoman attention back towards Serbia. By the end of July 1813, they had assembled a massive force and attacked Serbia from 3 directions, from Vidin, Niš, and Bosnia. Ahmet Pasha commanded the Vidin army, numbering around 60,000 soldiers. Mehmed Bayram Pasha led the Niš army, also numbering about 60,000, while the Bosnian forces were under the command of Bosnian Vizier Ali Pasha, numbering around 100,000. On the other side, the Serbs, anticipating the Turkish assault, decided to confront them head-on. Karadjordje had originally suggested guerrilla warfare, but the decision was made to fight in open battle. On the northern front, Mladen Milovanović led 18,000 troops. On the eastern front, Hajduk Veljko commanded 7,000. Sima Marković led 7,000 on the western front, and Miloš Obrenović commanded 6,500 in the southwest. A reserve of approximately 1,500 fighters was stationed in Topola under Karadjordje, who was seriously ill at that time. Altogether, about 50,000 Serbs faced a Turkish force of roughly 200,000. Ali Pasha attacked positions defended by Hajduk Veljko from Vidin. Veljko had constructed trenches, raised fortifications, and prepared to resist the Turks. The defense of Negotin was particularly fierce. Veljko held his ground and inflicted heavy losses on the attackers, but over time, the defenders' strength waned. He sent letters to Belgrade, mobilized militias, and remained confident in victory. On the 77th day of the siege, Hajduk Veljko was killed. Following this, Negotin fell into Turkish hands. The Serbs retreated toward the interior regions. The long Turkish column from Niš advanced along the Morava River to attack Serbia from the south. After a short march, they assaulted Deligrad. There, Nilak Editinacic organized the defense under Vujika Vudićević's leadership. Antonije Vjatic, positioned on the western flank, joined the defenders at Deligrad. Thanks to the brave defense of Deligrad, the Serbs temporarily held back the Turkish advance. Meanwhile, the Bosnian army crossed the Drina and captured Loznica. The attack affected the entire Serbian front, pushing the forces steadily towards Šabac. In August, the battle at Ravnja took place, where the Serbs fought heroically but were ultimately defeated, allowing the Turkish army to continue its advance. After the failure at Deligrad, the Turkish command reorganized and continued the offensive toward the south. Toma led the fortress defense while other units pressed deeper into Serbia, attempting to suppress the uprising. From the east, the massive Turkish army advanced relentlessly toward Belgrade, leaving little chance for organized resistance. Karadjordje, along with surviving commanders and some of the population, decided to cross the Danube and seek refuge in Austria. On the 6th of October, Belgrade fell, marking the collapse of the First Serbian Uprising. Belgrade held out until early November 1815. Defenders eventually left Serbia, with some fleeing to Austria, while others remained and returned home. In this devastating Turkish campaign, over 100,000 Serbs perished, and a similar number became refugees in Austria and among local rulers. The First Serbian Uprising ultimately did not succeed in fully liberating Serbia, but it demonstrated that the Ottoman forces were vulnerable to organized local resistance. It showed that, despite being outnumbered, the Serbian rebels could effectively challenge a much larger army. The uprising also inspired hope among the Balkan peoples that Ottoman rule could be resisted. It encouraged a broader awareness of national identity and the possibility of regional liberation. In the years that followed, these ideas laid the groundwork for future efforts to free the Balkans from Ottoman control, which would gradually unfold in the coming decades.